In 2003, Las Scarlet Serenas, 5 talented mariachi musicians, loaded their instruments and headed to an exclusive ranch outside Laredo for a wedding gig. They were never seen again. The case went cold. The families were left with nothing but questions. 6 years later, a federal raid on that same ranch uncovered a smuggling tunnel. And inside that tunnel, the band's scarlet costumes, stained and abandoned. What federal agents thought was a simple trafficking case became something much darker, a conspiracy involving corrupt officials, cartel lawyers, and a poker game where witnesses couldn't be left alive. One man refused to let the truth stay buried. In 2003, the 5 women of the mariachi band Las Scarlet Serenas loaded their instruments and drove toward a wedding gig at the exclusive Vance Ranch outside Laredo. Dressed in their signature scarlet and gold suits, they were last seen turning onto the long private road leading to the venue. For 6 years, their disappearance remained a frustrating cold case. The official file thick with dead ends and the quiet assumption that they had simply abandoned their lives. Then in 2009, a federal task force raiding the ranch for an unrelated crime uncovered a sophisticated smuggling tunnel. What agents photographed inside the tunnel would link the forgotten local disappearance to a federal crime in a way no one could have imagined. The persistent smell of synthetic oil and oxidized metal offered the only reliable constant in Alex Correa's life. It was an aroma that clung to his clothes and embedded itself beneath his fingernails, defining the narrow boundaries of his existence during the 6 long years since Sofia Vega had vanished. Late in the summer of 2009, the Laredo night bled humidly into the garage, the air hanging heavy and still, punctuated only by the metallic clatter of tools and the low drone of the fluorescent lights. Buried deep in the guts of a '98 Suburban, Alex wrestled with a transmission that refused to cooperate. The complexity of the job provided a welcome distraction, a mechanical puzzle demanding the kind of total focus that could momentarily silence the grief that otherwise roared in his ears. He worked with a methodical rhythm, the monotony serving as a dull anesthetic. This garage, once a shared dream with Sofia, had been repurposed into his solitary refuge. In the corner, perched precariously on a stack of old tires, a small, grainy television flickered. Usually tuned to sports or mere background noise. Tonight, a local news broadcast interrupted the programming. The anchor's voice, sharp and urgent, sliced through the hum of the shop fan. Breaking news tonight out of Webb County, the anchor announced, the graphic behind her flashing an aggressive red. Wiping grease from his hands with a rag, Alex felt his attention momentarily snagged. A massive joint task force operation earlier today targeted the Vance Ranch, a sprawling events venue located 30 m outside Laredo. Alex stopped moving entirely. The Vance Ranch. The name alone struck him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. It was the destination Sofia and her band Las Scarlet Serenas had been heading toward the night they disappeared in 2003. The very last place they were ever known to be. The report continued detailing a raid spurred by a tip from a recently arrested human trafficker desperate to cut a deal. The feds hadn't been searching for missing musicians. Their focus was drugs, money, and human cargo. What they uncovered instead was a sophisticated smuggling tunnel burrowed deep beneath the hard Texas soil. The broadcast cut to footage taken at the scene where agents milled about. The desert landscape rendered harsh under the floodlights. Then the anchor introduced a piece of evidence released by the task force. A standard photograph taken inside the tunnel. The image filled the small screen. It was dark and claustrophobic. The walls, rough, uneven earth and rock with a thick pipe running along the ceiling. A harsh glaring lamp deep in the passage cast long shadows, but it was the foreground that made Alex's heart seize. Piled haphazardly on top of dark storage crates were mariachi costumes. Not just any costumes, but the brilliant scarlet-red suits of Las Scarlet Serenas. The intricate gold embroidery, the wide belts, the large matching sombrero, they were identical to the ones Sophia, Isa, Elena, Val, and Camila had worn in the photo he kept taped to his toolbox. These vibrant symbols of celebration looked grotesquely out of place in the grim subterranean darkness. The wrench slipped from Alex's grip, clattering loudly on the concrete floor, the sound echoing in the sudden silence of the garage. He stumbled toward the television, eyes fixed on the screen, scrutinizing every detail of the grainy image. Needing to see closer, he squinted, pressing his face near the glass. The costumes featured large, soft, cream-colored bows at the collar. His gaze traced the outline of one bow draped over a jacket, and there, almost lost in the shadow, but catching the harsh light, was a faint glint of gold. A small pin shaped like a dove. His breath hitched. He knew that pin intimately. He had commissioned it himself from a jeweler in San Antonio as a gift for Sophia on their first anniversary. It was a unique, one-of-a-kind piece. The blood drained from his face as 6 years of rumors, dead ends, and agonizing silence shattered in an instant. It wasn't a desperate theory anymore. It was real. Fumbling for his phone, his hands shook violently, slick with grease. The news report had mentioned a federal task force hotline. He dialed the number, the ringing in his ears almost drowning out the tone. A crisp bureaucratic voice answered. Task Force Information Line. The costumes. Alex choked out, his voice rough with sudden urgency. The red costumes in the tunnel. I know who they belong to. You have to listen to me. The drive to the federal building in downtown Laredo passed in a blur of adrenaline and fragmented memories. Without waiting for a call back, Alex had simply locked the garage and driven. The engine of his old truck roaring through the otherwise empty streets. The humid night air rushing through the open windows did nothing to cool the fire burning in his chest. He arrived at the imposing concrete structure, its lights blazing despite the late hour. The lobby felt sterile and intimidating, designed to make visitors feel small. Following a tense exchange with security, Alex was eventually directed to a small windowless interview room to wait. An hour dragged by. As the adrenaline began to fade, it was replaced by a cold dread. He feared they didn't believe him, assuming he was just another grieving family member, one of dozens who had called over the years, chasing ghosts. Finally, the door opened and a man in a sharp, ill-fitting suit, stepped inside. He introduced himself as Agent Miller, the lead investigator on the smuggling operation. Miller looked exhausted, his eyes underlined with dark circles, and he regarded Alex with a practiced expression of polite skepticism. Mr. Correa, Miller began, sitting down across the metal table and opening a thin file. We understand you believe you have information regarding the costumes found at the Vance property. I don't believe I know, Alex interrupted, his voice tight. They belong to my fiancée, Sofia Vega, and her band. They disappeared in 2003. Miller nodded slowly, seemingly unimpressed. We are aware of the cold case, Mr. Correa. Many people have claimed to recognize those costumes since the photo was released. Mariachi suits are not uncommon in Laredo. But the pin is, Alex insisted, leaning forward. He pulled the worn photo from his wallet, the one from his toolbox, and slid it across the table. The image showed the 5 women smiling brightly beneath the colorful Pel Picado. Look at Sophia, the one in the center, the gold pin on her bow. It's a dove. I had it made for her. Miller glanced at the photo, then back at Alex. Mr. Correa, the pin in the evidence photo is barely visible. It could be anything. It's not anything. Alex shot back, his frustration mounting. It's unique and I can prove it. Miller sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. How? There's an engraving, Alex said, his voice dropping to a whisper. On the back of the pin. It's small. You'd have to look closely. It says Pour Saint-Prix forever. Miller studied him for a long moment, weighing the sincerity in his eyes against the inconvenience of checking the detail. Finally, he stood up. Wait here. The door clicked shut, leaving Alex alone with the hum of the ventilation system and the pounding of his own heart. Agent Miller walked briskly down the hallway, annoyance wearing with a flicker of professional curiosity. Protocol demanded he follow up on every lead, no matter how improbable. He descended into the basement where the evidence seized from the ranch was being processed. The air thick with the smell of damp earth and mildew. Locating the crate containing the costumes, he noted how the vibrant red fabric seemed to absorb the light in the sterile room. He carefully pulled out the jacket with the bow attached, the fabric stiff and stained. The gold dove pin was there, just as Alex had described. Miller picked up the pin, turning it over in his gloved hand, and angling it toward the harsh overhead light. And there it was, tiny, almost microscopic, but undeniably present. The engraved letters forming the words Pour Prix. A chill traced its way down Miller's spine. The detail was too specific, too personal to be a coincidence. This wasn't a guess. It was confirmation. He radioed his supervisor, his voice tight. The Korea lead is credible. We have a positive ID on the costumes. Get him into a formal interview room. We need a full statement. Alex was moved to a larger room. The atmosphere having shifted dramatically. Miller was no longer dismissive. He was focused, intense. For the next 3 hours, Alex recounted the story of the disappearance, the gig at the Vance Ranch, the last phone call, the agonizing years of silence. When he finished, a surge of hope rose in Alex's chest. They finally knew. The connection was undeniable. Now they would act. So what now? Alex asked, leaning forward. You know the costumes were in his tunnel. This proves Vance was involved in their disappearance. Miller leaned back in his chair, his expression shuddering. Mr. Korea, Marcus Vance is a major player. This tunnel is part of a massive international smuggling operation. That is our priority. But my fiancé, we understand your pain, Miller interrupted, his tone reverting to the practiced sympathy of earlier. And this is a significant break in the cold case. But we have active threats to national security to deal with. The disappearance, while tragic, is secondary to the ongoing investigation. Secondary? Alex stood up, his chair scraping loudly on the floor. They were people. They were everything. And we will investigate, Miller said calmly, standing as well. But we have to follow the active threads first. We have your statement. We advise you to go home, Mr. Korea, and let us do our job. Alex stared at him as the hope curdled into a bitter realization. They weren't going to help. They were going to bury this under the weight of the smuggling case, just like the local police had buried it 6 years ago. He had given them the key, and they were locking the door. He turned and walked out of the federal building, the cold night air hitting him like a wall. He wouldn't be sidelined. Not again. If the feds refused to find the truth, he would have to do it himself. Back in the familiar confines of his garage, the smell of oil and metal no longer offered comfort. Now it smelled like stagnation. Alex pulled out the boxes stored in the back office. Ah, and peeling, the sign faded by the relentless sun. Inside, the shop smelled strongly of saltwater and old bait. Ben Carter stood behind the counter, looking older, heavier, and worn down by the years. The sharp focus Alex remembered had been replaced by a dull cynicism. Mr. Carter? Alex asked, the bell above the door jingling faintly. Carter looked up, his eyes narrowing in instant recognition. Korea, what the hell are you doing here? I need your help, Alex said, stepping closer. Carter snorted, turning back to the fishing lures he was organizing. I don't do that anymore. I sell bait. They found something, Alex persisted. At the Vance Ranch. Carter froze. He turned slowly, his eyes locking onto Alex's. What did they find? Alex produced a printed copy of the evidence photo, the costumes in the tunnel, and laid it on the glass counter. Carter stared at the photo, his expression unreadable, tracing the outline of the sombrero with a thick finger. So, they finally got him. They got the tunnel, Alex corrected. They don't care about the girls. They're calling it a cold case secondary to the smuggling. Carter nodded slowly, a bitter smile twisting his lips. Sounds about right. Vance has friends in high places. Always did. You knew, Alex said, his voice tight. Back in 2003, you knew it was the ranch. Knowing and proving are two different things, Carter replied, his voice rough. I pushed too hard. I rattled the wrong cages and they forced me out. They took my badge, my pension, my life. He gestured around the dilapidated shop. This is what happens when you go after Marcus Vance. I'm going after him, Alex said, his voice low and steady. And I need someone who knows how the game is played. Carter shook his head. I'm out, Korea. Go home before he buries you, too. I can't, Alex said, the desperation bleeding into his voice. That was my fiancé's pin on that costume. I can't let this go. Not now. Carter looked at the photo again, then at Alex, recognizing the same relentless obsession that had once consumed him. The bitterness in his eyes shifted, replaced by something else. A flicker of the old fire, a chance at redemption. Vance always thought he was untouchable, Carter muttered, more to himself than to Alex. Maybe he finally made a mistake. He sighed, the sound heavy and resigned. Walking over to the door, he flipped the sign from open to closed and locked the deadbolt. All right, Korea, he said, turning back. Tell me everything. They drove back to Laredo in Alex's truck, the long stretches of silence punctuated only by the rhythmic thrum of the tires on the asphalt. Ben Carter sat in the passenger seat, staring out the window, the investigative gears in his head turning again after years of disuse. Upon arriving at the garage, Ben spread the case files out on the workbench, scanning the documents with a practiced efficiency. He paused on the initial police report, his finger tracing the timeline of events. This is where it all went wrong, Ben said, tapping the report. The timeline, it never made sense. The official report stated that the band was scheduled to perform at the Vance Ranch on Saturday, May 17, 2003, disappearing sometime before the gig. Consequently, the police had focused their investigation entirely on Saturday, interviewing the wedding guests and staff. They found nothing. If they disappeared on Friday, Ben continued, his voice low, then the police interviewed the wrong people. They looked in the wrong places. They missed whatever was happening at the ranch on Friday night. But why would the report say Saturday? Alex asked, the confusion evident. Everyone knew the gig was Saturday. Did they? Ben countered, raising an eyebrow. Or did someone tell them it was Saturday? The realization hit Alex like a cold wave. The person who provided the timeline, the person who booked the gig. Javier Sales, Alex whispered. The band's manager. We need to talk to him, Ben said, his eyes hardening. We need to know why he gave the police the wrong date. They found Javier Sales managing a small, noisy cantina in the heart of Laredo, where the air was thick with the smell of stale beer and fried food. Music blared from the jukebox as patrons shouted over the noise. Javier was behind the bar looking harried and stressed. He was older now, his hair thinning, his face etched with worry lines. He hadn't seen Alex in years, and when he looked up and saw him standing there, accompanied by the imposing figure of Ben Carter, his face palled. Alex? Javier stammered, wiping his hands on his apron. What are you doing here? We need to talk, Alex said, his voice low. About the Vance Ranch, Javier flinched. I can't. I'm working. We'll wait, Ben said, crossing his arms. They took a seat at a corner table, the noise of the cantina swirling around them. For 3 hours, they waited, watching Javier, letting the pressure build. Finally, the last patron stumbled out, and Javier began closing up. Alex and Ben followed him out the back door into the narrow alley behind the cantina. The air was thick with the smell of garbage and decay, the sudden silence after the noise of the cantina jarring. "What do you want?" Javier demanded, turning to face them, his voice shaking. "I told the police everything I know." "You told them the gig was Saturday," Ben said, stepping closer, crowding Javier against the brick wall. "Was it?" Javier's eyes darted back and forth, looking for an escape. "Yes, it was Saturday. I have the contract." "The contract can say anything," Ben countered, his voice low and menacing. "We want the truth." "It is the truth," Javier insisted, his voice rising hysterically. "No, it's not," Alex interrupted, his voice raw with emotion. "Sophia called me Friday afternoon. She said they were heading to the ranch. They were excited. They were supposed to be back that night. They must have gone somewhere else," Javier stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. "But that was only the beginning. What happens next will change everything. Don't miss episode 2, coming soon."